Okay, so hello everybody. This will be the last talk of the day, so we hope that you enjoy it. We've been learning many things during the whole day, so we'll try not to repeat things again, and we'll try to, well, at least explain other point of views or other things. First of all, an easy question just to warm up, okay? What is for you? It's not necessarily a formal definition, but for you, what is an architecture style? For example?
So let me start my own opinion, by the way. So I believe that an architectural style is like a vocabulary of components and the connectors between them that work very well with a given set of constraints. Typically, this architectural style or architectural pattern, as debated this morning, is proven as good or bad on implementation time. So there's, in my opinion, there's no right style as long as implementation is not there to support it, and vice versa, to be honest.
Victor, Alex?
Well, yeah, I agree with Anna about the definition, but I remember some time ago that I was speaking with some startups, and they told me that they are not following any architectural style because they just try things. And they want to try one thing and see if it works, and if it works, then that's fine. Then they, let's say that they apply some kind of architecture there, and if not, they just drop, and they don't spend time on architecting something correctly. So, I mean, maybe it's also in a style, right? Not using any architecture at all, just coding, and that's all. But yeah, I mean, I think that the definition, let's say, or the academic definition that Anna has done.
There are multiple, by the way.
What?
There are multiple definitions, so everyone has their own understanding.
So, I don't really know the definition, but to me it's more about accomplishing certain things, trying to accomplish certain outcomes, which might or might not be easier to accomplish following certain patterns, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about accomplishing certain things, whatever those things are. Availability, ility, and other illities, right? Like what Soto mentioned, I'm not big on kind of, I prefer experimentation over following any kind of best practice. Actually, I hate the word best practice because it assumes kind of like this is the best thing you can do, which is to me kind of silly. It's more about accomplishing certain things through certain patterns or not.
Yeah, well, regarding this, I mean that maybe it's not an architecture pattern per se, but I like the situation where I was in a company being as an official architect, and comes all the developers to me and said, yeah, we're going to use the data access object pattern, right? Because everyone uses this pattern, right? And I asked them, why? And then it was like, yes, we are using in all our projects. So you mean that sometimes we just do things because it has been done in that way, but why you need that access object pattern, for example? Probably you don't need it, but you use it because, this is what you've done. And it's more like this that you said, that the best practices thing, right? That sometimes you want to follow something, but you just do it blindly. You trust on the author of the book, and you just do what the author says, but not thinking if you really need it or not.
But another thing that I think is important, I might be wrong, is that I think that most of the patterns are somehow directly related to applications. And I think that we are now seeing the move of those patterns being moved towards the system, right? Kind of system needs to be highly available. System needs to be this and that in this way or that way. And the importance of implementing those patterns inside of applications is becoming smaller. I'm not saying non-existent, but kind of smaller, because many of the things that were previously in a domain of an application are now in a domain of a system as a whole. Like, this is how you do secure communication to your applications, right? We don't do those things inside of applications anymore. This is how we make your application highly available. We don't do those things in applications anymore, or at least not fully inside of applications anymore. So I think that we are moving more towards the domain of splitting applications into more of them and smaller, and then moving those patterns on a level of the system and outside of those applications. So I know that now I'm going to make many of you mad, but I think that it's becoming less important what is done inside of application, and then more important what is done outside on a level of the system as a whole.
Well, the system as a whole counts a lot, because at the end of the day, the users are going to use the overall system. But the thing is that the application itself still matters. Regardless of, because you mentioned earlier Kubernetes, regardless of how awesome Kubernetes is, if your application that is running inside each pod, or the applications that are running inside the pods are not well designed or coded or thought, you're still ending up with the same problem. So you can make smaller balls of mud or whatever, but you're not going to end up with a better application just because you've used a certain tool. So this is another thing. A lot of people dive into tools and think that that tool is going to offer them a solution or is going to be the right thing for their architecture without actually thinking, well, what are actually my needs? So, and sometimes tooling is put on the first place and the architecture afterwards, and actually the needs for what they had.
Yeah, but tooling also defines your architecture. So for example, just
True.
to keep example with Kubernetes, right? I mean, we can change to something else,
Okay.
mainframe. I mean, if that's...
No, no, please.
Okay, so
sorry.
it's going to define what you need to do inside of your applications for that application to behave well inside of the system, platform, system, whatever you want to call it, right? So the moment you adopt and say, we're going to run in cloud, we're going to run in Kubernetes, we're going to run here or here, that is already going to define a lot of the things you have to do. Not necessarily kind of ABC, but at least on principle level.
True, but this means that the set of constraints you had allowed you to run it on cloud. There are a lot of things that nowadays are, sometimes overlooked. Like, is the cloud the right thing for everything, by the way? So is just one cloud the right thing for everything? There are things that cannot be run into cloud. So, and it's the same thing as not everything can be Dockerized and put in a container, even though that people still try to do that. So there's no silver bullet architecture, as discussed earlier today. There's no silver bullet pattern. There's always the idea of identifying the components in your system and how those are going to work, given what the business wants, what they told you that they want, what the expectations are for your application to produce, for your platform to produce. So this is where everything starts, and this is where you're getting your style, in my opinion, and then afterwards you're validating that style with the rest of the things that are coming afterwards, with all the utilities, and of course with tooling, and of course with people, because you also have to look into the people and the organization that you're putting that into.
Yeah, well, but I would say regarding this, or you mentioned that for every platform, if you choose cloud, then you will need to code for cloud or architect for cloud. But historically, I think that the developers will try to avoid this. If you see now, you can just Kubernetes, and then you will need to take care of Kubernetes and how you put the code inside Kubernetes. But then, well, someone invent service meshes, and then you put Istio, and then some of these things that you usually put on your business code, and it's dropped from your business code that put it in at infrastructure layer. But if you think about serverless, it's exactly the same. It's like put your efforts on writing business code and let the infrastructure things happen outside of your, let's say, architecture. Now it's like when you start thinking, if, for example, in the case of a serverless, let's say, architecture is really architecture from the point of view of a developer or not, right? Because you just write code. So, I think that everything is evolving in this sense of changing where the things are going and what we can be considered architecture or not.
Talking about this kind of evolving and how are we changing our way of doing architecture, I think, and this is just a personal opinion, that many developers or architects are trying to use fashionable architectures or fashionable patterns. Do you think that there's a hype in the industry, or this is something really necessary for the business that they are running?
Yeah, I mean, probably if someone has seen me in any conference, you will heard this from me that said, oh, well, that people say, yeah, we're using this because Netflix is doing it, right? And it's just like this. I mean, that I agree that if Netflix is doing, and they are blogging, and I always explain the example of chaos engineering. Since Netflix is doing chaos engineering, then I'm doing chaos engineering as well. But you don't stop and think about if you can or not do chaos engineering, right? So it's somehow a hype on this. And then also a lot of people mixes technology and best solution in the sense that if you want to use Kubernetes, for example, you don't need to have a microservice architecture. You can have a monolith as well and deploy to Kubernetes. So if you want to learn Kubernetes, use Kubernetes, then it's not necessary to move to microservices. You can stay on monolith. So I mean that sometimes it's, yeah, we try to do the, or put into our knowledge the last technology, and we want to develop on production with the newest technology, but sometimes it's not feasible at all.
Yeah, but so I completely agree, right? But still, I prefer that extreme. The extreme is now I'm gonna look for excuse not to try out new technology, which is more damaging to me than trying. I mean, I prefer somebody who is gonna go into hype. At least he's gonna figure out something new, and maybe fail or not. Than the other extreme saying, no, we're not gonna try what Netflix does. We are fine. We are fine what we are doing, right? So,
well, yeah, there is this
hype, at least to me, is a signal that somebody is trying to learn something new.
Yeah, this is the innovators part of the organization, right? The thing is that when you can cross the chasm, right? All the between you gets from the innovators and early adopters to, let's say, majority of the organization, which is the. I mean, that probably we are agreeing. I mean, that we are talking about the same, right? But yeah, I tend to, use the latest technologies. In fact, I'm just, for example, speaking about testing in production or service meshes, which is something new. So I agree that we should adopt the latest technologies, but always taking a bit of care of not dying in the process. Because I know some companies that they died when they tried to move from monolith to microservices, and now they are close. Yeah? They just failed, and they spend a lot of money on this. So I mean that it's also important to take care of what you choose or the movements that you want to do.
But it's also good to experiment. So before choosing something so radical, like radical change in architectural style, you should think of experimenting first. This is why sometimes it's good to have proof of concepts or some tryouts at small scale. Of course, not building the entire system.
Yeah, but you know how this works, right? That the people say, oh, look, I've seen a presentation about microservices, and it seems that microservices is going to solve all our problems. Let's move to microservices. Yeah, you can do an experiment. No, we need to solve all problems. Go to microservices.
I agree with that, but there is a sentence that I really didn't like. I know a company who tried microservices and failed, and now they're bankrupt or something like that, right? Yeah. Now I can equally say I know a company who didn't try anything and is now bankrupt, right? That's not an argument at all.
Of course. I mean, we never know what could happen if they stayed in a monolith, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, but this is what happened at the end.
I know, and I know a company who didn't try anything. It doesn't exist. So,
if I may ask, well, you try a new architecture. You kind of observe it that it's not working for you. At some point, you want to go back, maybe, because if you're seeing that you're constantly losing with the new stuff that you're putting in production, you kind of have to draw a signal of alarm, like saying, okay, maybe we should go back to the other one because it was generating more revenue than this one, and you go back. Anyway. And this gets to another point, okay, you're taking this hype, you are choosing a new architectural style, you get it to production, but you have to have some plan B for the worst moments. You always plan for plan B. You just don't dive directly. And secondly, if you are doing such much change, you should reassure yourself that that thing that you're putting in production, is actually going to work for you with a lot of testing, by the way, and lots of kind of testing and so on. So nowadays, I think there are a lot of tools, open source, and not only open source, vendor-based, that can help organizations to measure if that thing that they've built is actually good for them before like dropping it into production and saying, oops, it is not working as expected for so many users on the internet. So there are workarounds. It's not like, I don't know, 10 years ago while I started my development career on, like everyone, monoliths. So it was nice, it was modular, but still. And I wouldn't say that what I was working on at that time should have been changed to microservices, by the way. It was very good as it was. So that one shouldn't be on microservices. So there are things that shouldn't be moved. But this is, again, a decision that the architects are taking together. Typically, I don't think there's just one architect in a project. There are many more. And if it's just one architect, well, I hope that he or she is talking with the development team or everyone that is doing the implementation, because there's, as said this morning, the architect is no longer isolated. He's no longer just a dictator of decisions. He is, in a democratic way, talking with the team. And the team can tell him, well, this is not the right way. And by the way, since we're talking about things, I've recently read a blog about the company that didn't choose microservices, by the way, and they were giving the arguments of why they didn't go with that. I mean, they measured inside their company why that architecture is not right for them. And they decided it's not right move, so we're not going with that. So this is brave to measure before, doing that. And honestly, even though that you're seeing at the conference that a framework is nice and cool and look, all of my friends are using it, let's use it too. I don't think you can go to your employer and say, tomorrow we're going to use this. You're still going to have some decision makers in the mean. Unless you have so much influence in your company that you're really trusted and like, okay, let's do this. But yes, I agree. A lot of the styles today, and especially microservices, is chosen based on the fact they saw it at others. It's advertised by others, and well, it's like when you're buying the new iPhone. Like everyone is buying it, but not necessarily because they need it. Because you also maybe had another iPhone that was working very well, and you don't need necessarily the new features of the new one. You just need to think if you really need that. And same with the architecture. Do you really need that?
Yeah, I think that...
Try it first and then think.
Yeah, you go to the Apple store and try it first. And then
yeah, exactly. I mean, trying is thinking whether you need it or no is useless until you try it. I mean, that's a beef I have in many architects, is that we often have the division, kind of like I'm thinking and designing, and then somebody's implementing, and then there is that division, which is kind of like thinking and trying with different people, different departments and stuff like that. I mean, just try it. I mean, spend the week, see how it goes, like do experiments like we heard in a previous talk and make a decision to proceed, modify, or go back, right?
I think that's awesome, and I think this is the best approach in order to follow agile methodologies. Is if you're going to fail fast, but to fail you have to measure what is failure or what is not. So once that you're going to try, how to measure if is a good solution or a bad solution? Do you have any recipe for this?
Collect data and measure.
Yeah.
Easy.
No, yeah,
but
probably it depends.
It's not, but the sad thing is that maybe I was unlucky, but in many instances where I was, simply companies are going blind. We are not collecting data, or we are collecting data, but we don't know what to do with them. Kind of like that's the situation. I rarely see, like the previous presentation, I rarely see that in action. Kind of that somebody really measured data, and it's not even that hard. I mean, I don't know what was done in the previous presentation was hard, but you can, it's not that hard to get some really basic conclusions, kind of, is this faster, is this slower, What can we do to make it faster or slower or whatever? It's not that hard.
Okay, really interesting.
Well, I would say that I think you need to, yeah, if you go blindly, then it has no sense, but sometimes, I mean, it's really obvious. Just focusing on one parameter. What do you want to do? Reduce the, I don't know, the money you're spending on the cloud, or you want to increase the revenue or the incomings that you're receiving from your users, or you want to just attract more people to your platform, for example, just to get more quota. So it's just defining one simple goal and go towards that. But if you go blindly, then yeah. But this will depend on in which stage of the organizations are. For example, if you are in a startup, probably you want to grab as much as people as possible to use your platform. So you don't care at all at first about money. But then when you're growing, you become more an adult enterprise or more not a startup organization, then probably you want to be more focused on the revenue.
Great. So we've been talking about companies that are bankrupt because of microservices. We've been talking about teams and architects and so on. So it's going great. It's going great. Everything under control. Okay, we've been talking about architecture styles, okay? Is it possible to have a system with different architectural styles inside the system itself?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and how do you manage all these things, or how do you reach this position? I mean, is something natural, or is something that you think beforehand? Okay, I'm going to do this.
So such a system, from my point of view and experience, is driven when typically you have multiple types of stakeholders involved. So you have different types of business consumers for your system, for the big system. So this is when you are starting to to combine multiple architectural styles, because you have needs specified by one group, needs specified by other group, and it cannot be addressed with a single style. This is when you combine them.
If you follow the previous thought that you need to choose the architecture depending on your needs, that automatically means that you need to mix out architectural styles. Because if you have more than one application, then you have different needs for applications, and therefore it could be different. I mean, those might be the same needs, but if you say all of my applications are using the same style, that means that they're all the same, right? Just following the logic, not even practice, kind of like logically speaking, they must be different.
But then what if you want to change this architectural style because maybe business requirement changes and so on? So how do you face that problem?
I don't have the answer how do you face it. What I do know is that the smaller the scope of the change, the easier the change is. And now we would be going back into breaking the monoliths.
Well, actually, I really like the monolith conversation. I'm a big fan of the monolith. And just there's a question that I have to say, that I have to ask. Do you think that we will reach again the point where the monolith is the king? Or are we going to see presentations in conferences like this one talking about the monolith? Or do you think that the time has gone for the monolith?
I speak about monolith. I mean, I spoke last year, for example. Last year or last summer was, yeah. I mean that what you need to, in my opinion, what you need to think about is that the microservices is not the final goal. It's just one way. The final goal is to, let's say, reach production several times per day. Then you can do it using monolith or using a microservice architecture. But microservices never should be the final goal. That's for the reason I always say that if you are able to do a good monolith and you are able to deploy it to production several times per day, then maybe you can choose the movement to microservices, but not before.
Why not before? Maybe you cannot do it with a specific monolith, so you might want to break it before that, right?
Yeah, but
I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
I understand the logic.
yeah,
behind
but
that.
I don't know how many companies slash projects will require a microservices architecture and not anything else. But for example, I mean that
Depends what is the problem you're trying to solve with that.
What-
And deploying multiple times a day is not the only problem that is solved by smaller applications. For example, I can say I want smaller applications because I find unacceptable to have a team of more than 6, 7 people working on an application, because beyond that number, it's inefficient, it's slow, it introduces too much administrative overhead and so on and so forth. I'm just picking up a second reason, right? So small team can be my goal, and I cannot have a big application with a small team.
well,
right?
you're gonna still have small teams, all of them working in the same code base. The thing is that all the team needs to commit regularly, not after 2 weeks, because then you've got the hell of merge thing. That's true. But if you
You just said the reason why you cannot have it. Make up
No.
your mind.
Okay, but what I mean is that you can still have it if you want. It's not. I mean, this is not. I mean, at the end, any reason to choose microservices, it's like okay or not. I mean, or you can use a monolith. And if you have a good team people just committing several times per day, then you still have all the teams. You're still managing several teams, but all of them working in the same code base. And it's, I'm not saying that it's
Possible, yes.
Yeah, of course. I mean, for the reason I said that, I always explain the example of a Stack Overflow, because, nobody uses a Stack Overflow. But if you see a Stack Overflow is a monolith. So, they are receiving, thousands of requests per second. They have a big code base, several teams working, and they're deploying maybe like 30 or 40 times per day, and it's a monolith. So that if you check all the conditions or all the reasons that why you choose microservices, then think about a Stack Overflow. And they said, okay, I don't know, for example, this, a big code base. Yeah, of course, with microservices it can be easy, but also you can do it with a monolith. Or having a high throughput, okay? You need a high, or a lot of requests per second, okay, yeah, that's fine. Stack Overflow is having 2 and they have a monolith. When you choose the architecture, microservices or not, you should also see if it really pays off the movement that you're going to do. And for this reason, I'm not saying that, for the reason I said, because I don't have anything against microservices. In fact, I wrote a book about microservices. What I'm saying is that the final goal should never be microservices.
No, it shouldn't. Yeah. You always do something either because you don't know better or because you're trying to accomplish some goals. However, more often than not, in more serious systems that you would start designing today without historical baggage behind you, because that always complicates things.
Greenfield.
Yeah. And something with more going towards serious size or importance, you're more likely going to take that approach, I would, for a simpler reason, not by default. So think about it, but if I had no other input, I would take it because I get scalability out of the way. To me, that's similar to the previous discussion about, what was the title of your discussion? Reactive systems, exactly, right? You would choose those as well today simply because if you don't have any other input that would tell you that it's better to do something else, that's the norm today.
Okay, great. I think there's an agreement, more or less, so yeah. We all agree on that topic. Let's jump now a little bit into the team, because I think it's an important piece of the architecture, even though it's not the architecture itself, but I think that they are really important in a company, okay? Would you give a team the autonomy to make architectural decisions?
Yes.
Yes.
At least I would say that is the tendency. That they're going from bottom to top. But I'm sure that if you think about other traditional business, this is not happening in that way. I'm not saying, I mean that.
The question was whether you would give them that. That was the question.
Yeah, yes, I will give them, of course, the decision. But I mean that, but I try to also add some kind of, or be more human in the sense that say, yeah, I will give them, but I know that, for example, if you are in a traditional business, I will not be able to do it. Yeah. So.
What do you mean by traditional business?
Bank.
So that's traditional.
Or running on COBOL.
To be honest, on COBOL, I wouldn't want to take decisions.
Okay, but it's okay. So all of you agree that we can give that responsibility to the team, but we also agree during this day that architecture is kind of coupled with the business itself. So we can assume then that if we give them these responsibilities, they are going to understand the business requirements, what the business is expecting from us. Do you think that in reality they have this knowledge in order to make the best decision for the business?
No, but so if they don't, let's say they don't,
Okay.
for the sake of arguing, still the job of an architect or anybody else is to convince the team that that is the right way to do stuff, something, whatever that something is, right? What is disastrous is when you impose a solution, because then the team does not own it. You can, if it fails, right? It failed because of you, not because of the team, right? Kind of like, you don't want to have a team where people are capable of writing only getter-setters, right? Kind of, you need to own, the team needs to own something. What I really dislike and I think is disaster, even though very common, is when you say, okay, so you're gonna do it like this, this, and that, whatever that something is. End of the story, do it. And then 3 years later you say, why is it not done, right? I mean.
Typically every team starts a project with the end goal in mind. So you should trust them on taking the right decisions. Secondly, every architectural decision is not taken by just one person. It has pros and contras. Even if you have a small team of 6, 7 people, those 6, 7 people, my assumption is that they're autonomously thinking and they have their own opinions. So my expectation, and given the experience, is that not everyone thinks the same as you. No matter how well regarded are in the organization, no matter what is your role, no matter what's your title and so on, people still have their own opinion. And nowadays, it's a democracy everywhere, so everyone can state their opinion. This is the best way to take an architectural decision, to be honest. I mean, to hear everyone's thoughts. And typically on an architectural decision, everyone contributes, because it's impossible for it can start from a topic, but everyone contributes to that. And there are multiple views to see that. So this is why the answer was yes from all of us, because first of all, I think all of us trust our teams, so this is why we think that for others it would be good too. But this is, again, there are other cases when trust maybe is not there 100%, or as you said, well, do they know the business? Well, they should know the business, because this is how the project started, with what we're going to build here today. No, not with we're going to use this beautiful microservice or monolithic architecture. It started with, we're going to build this system that is going to do these things, and it has to achieve these certain attributes. Because the users didn't wrote to you like, we want a beautiful microservice architecture. They wrote to you, we want a system that does that and that.
No, that's awesome. I think that I would like to work with all of you, because you really...
We're hiring.
So I have kind of a...
We have a spot left. He left.
Actually, that's true. If any of you feel comfortable just coming here, you have to contribute to this interesting conversation, just feel free to come here. We are open to more people join us. Well, in my opinion, I think on all my colleagues and my past experience, if I join the hype of microservices plus going to a conference for the whole weekend. When I arrive on Monday, everybody is like crazy. We have to use Istio, and we have to build microservices, and we have to deploy 30 times per day.
Yeah, but that is happening if you have very mature team. Kind of that's like kind of children, and then you give them candies and they I need to eat it, right? Kind of more experienced people and teams do not react like that. There is always hype, you're adopting new things, but of course now if you lock a team that they never heard about, the last thing that they heard is a mainframe, and now you show them Istio and Kubernetes, of course they're gonna freak out, right? But normally professionals who tend to be a bit more informed, they're getting those informations in a more granular fashion, right? So it's not really happening that much.
Okay, awesome. So it's important to say that the context is a team that is kind of mature and they understand more or less the trade-offs.
If it's not, change the company.
Okay, let's talk now a little bit about the second system syndrome. I've got here the definition, so I can introduce to all of you. I didn't know what the meaning of that syndrome yesterday night, but I write it down. So it is coming from the mythical man month, and it is the tendency of a small, elegant, and successful system to be succeeded by over-engineered, bloated systems due to inflated expectations and overconfidence. Do you think that this is something that is really happening in the industry?
Well, yesterday I was reading an article which says that one PHP page with thousands of lines, they are earning 2,500 euros per day. I don't know, I mean that, yeah, I know that it's really nice to have microservices architecture and I don't know, or a big, Kubernetes and Istio and everything there. Yeah, it's really fun, but a PHP page is, earning a lot of money. So yeah, I mean that maybe in some cases, yes, we are engineering, but this has happened all the time, I guess.
Well, I've read the book. It's an old book, but it's still good. The thing is, when you're building the first version of a system, you're looking to satisfy certain conditions, but you also think on what you're going to do better on the second one. And the way you're thinking at the architecture, you want also to be ready for the new nice things that you're going to put in the second version, to be honest. And why you're not putting the nice things even from the start in the first version? Well, the cool stuff and so on, because maybe you have some constraints on time, on budget, on earning the trust of the business that you can deliver that thing that they wanted from you. But the second system syndrome is actually something that can be, nowadays I think is not very often encountered, because if you are thinking what you're going to do better in the second version, but focusing on the first one, but also thinking what you're going to put in the second one and in the next ones that are going to come afterwards, this is how you actually build an evolutionary architecture. And nowadays, it kind of comes from the business side that is telling you, well, today I want this and this and this, but in 3 months I want this and this and this. So you have these kind of expectations set on a given time. So you don't encounter, at least in my opinion, I don't think you can encounter this syndrome nowadays. And the solution in the book, it was really interesting that you hire an architect that has done 2 systems or has the experience of 2 systems of the same kind. But it's not like this. I mean, you can still have an architect that really thinks on what he's going to build, a team of architects that thinks on what they're going to build and how they're going to increment that architecture that they're building over there, because this is about it at the end of the day. And I don't think, nowadays we have the syndrome of like replicating what others have done. That's a different syndrome We have evolved from the second system, and that we've evolved like replicating what others did. So, to be honest, I think that's avoidable, and it's not something that you see. But again, you depend also on the implementation, because you can have a very nice, good architecture, and if you don't pay attention at the version 1 of how that was implemented, you can still have very beautiful goals in your mind for the second version. Same architecture, but guess what? It won't work because of how it was coded, the first one. So you still have to pay attention a lot at the first one in order to have a second one built without pain.
Also, ideally, we would never get to the second system, but continuously, eventually be refactoring, modifying, and stuff like that. Kind of like, I mean, ideal situation is not that you have a system, it works for 3 years, and then you build a new system, right? Kind of after those 3 years. Ideal situation, which is hard, is to have gradual improvements to your system. And not only adding new features, but improving it in many other different ways.
True. But again, this is the common effort in a team. It's not done just by architecture.
No architects in this story, yes.
All of this sounds really, really good in theory and in a book, but could you provide some examples where you face something like this, where you have a system and you have to evolve it, or the tricks that you use in the past or in your current companies to build an architecture that can be easily changed by the team, or, well, yeah, by the team?
So I don't know. I mean, in last couple of years, what I've been working on, we never had that problem simply because we're changing things every week. So it's kind of like in the last 2 years, and we actually made ended up with 3 completely independent versions of things that don't end up resembling each other, but still all those things were kind of gradual day-to-day changes, not necessarily day-to-day, week-to-week or whatever. It simply transforms over time, right? And I'm very of those terms you just mentioned, because that somehow assumes that there is an upfront design that defines everything, and then how do you change at some later moment to some other upfront design that will change everything, right? If you go with the concept of team, maybe somebody's more senior architect, whatever in a team, but team is working on something and that is just simply evolving over time. There are very few cases I know of that somebody says, goes to trash, let's start over. Nobody has money for that.
There are many companies in the world, so I cannot answer.
Come on.
Please, welcome.
I just wanted to, I do have that experience, and I just wanted to tell the story. So one of the things that I think is really important is that if we're talking about modern architecture, the modern architectural thinking, that's an evolving thing too. So you need to evolve your understanding and your model of what the architecture of your system is, as you discover more things, and then you need to evolve the implementation and the reality of your system kind of within that context. So when we built our financial exchange, we had a theory of what the architecture should be, and we built the first version to that architecture. We built a thing called a staged event-driven architecture to the system, and we measured it, and it was rubbish. It was nowhere close to good enough. So we had to evolve our architectural thinking, and then we had to evolve the system within that architectural thinking. And I think to do this properly, to do this with quality, that's an ongoing exercise, whatever the nature of the architecture. We should always be questioning it. So I think George said in his presentation, it's this idea of establishing a theory of the system. And there are 2 different theories of the system, at least. But there's the architectural theory of the system, and there's the actual implementation theory of the system, and both of those must evolve to get to something good. Sorry, I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
No, stay.
Stay.
Dave and please stay with us. I mean, it kind of awesome. And I have another free seat here, so please. Okay. Talking about all these business and quality attributes and all of this, we've been talking many times that okay, we have to choose which are the most important parts for our business, and then start building our architecture based on that quality attributes, which could be performance or availability or whatever. That's okay until the business maybe ask for more quality attributes that weren't in the first equation. Following that theory, we can end up trying to achieve all the quality attributes that are in the book. Is there an architecture that supports all of them?
No. But it's going back to what he just said. It's kind of like, it's not if business, it's business will be changing. Technology will be changing. Everything is changing, kind of like it's simply, it's kind of like, the question is wrong, as if kind of, what if this happens? It will be happening, and it is happening all the time, right? The only thing that you need to worry about is whether you are adapting to those things more or less continuously, or you're waiting for significant amount of time to pass and then worry about what's going on. But it's ridiculous to expect that those things are not going to change even on a weekly basis. So
I'd agree with that as well. So you're not going to wait for the second system to change your mind on the architecture. That, you know, part of the game is to be able to work. You take your growing model of the understanding of the relevant qualities, and you do the trade-offs that Mark was talking about. And you do that. You make those decisions on an ongoing basis, and you evolve your thinking all of the time. You refine your model all of the time, and there are going to be constraints on how fast you can move. You know, if you make a big jump from one kind of architecture to another, that might be a hard move. But if that's the direction of the business, Amazon's a good example. Amazon's a good example. We all think of Amazon as this shining example of small teams and microservices and stuff like that. Used to be an n-tiered PHP application backed by a relational database which didn't scale. That's why they had to make the move. So you make these choices, and that's the part of the game. I think I'm a grumpy old man. I don't think we've learned very much in our industry. But I think the one thing that we have learned is that nearly everything that we need to do continuously, and architecture is no different.
I think the problem in many of similar questions or debates is that there is still that notion that there are those phases like architecture, development, testing, production, 5 years later. Kind of like, and I think that very often, I'm not saying today, but in general, I notice that kind of when people ask such questions, it's kind of like, yeah, because architecture is something you define and then you follow. And that's the problem. That's the real issue. That kind of like there is a read-only document, right?
The lure is it's a lovely simple idea. Wouldn't the world be nice if it was like that? Trouble is, it's not.
Okay, so I think that we are more or less running out of time. So I think it's the right moment. If you have any question, any comment, I encourage you to ask or to participate in some way.
I think that I got them depressed.
Used to be sunny outside, so depression should go away.
If not, I encourage you at least to do a conclusion of the panel discussion. If you have any final words or conclusion or something, it could be nice at least to share with the audience.
Don't do microservices.
Lord.
They're evil. Work of Satan.
And use Jenkins X, right?
No. I would say, I'm not participating in this, by the way. I would say to choose the architecture that fits your needs and not the trends. And there is no right. There's a right that you and your teams know. It's not the right defined by others.
So if I might redefine, kind of try stuff.
Yeah, that's
try things.
before taking a decision.
Exactly. Don't make a decision by reading a blog.
Can I add one more thing? So you said that earlier, and I reacted badly when you said that. It's not that I don't think that we should try things, but I think that we should have a theory, we should try and propose an explanation, then we should come up with an experiment and try things. So we should use the scientific method to learn.
Yeah.
Just data's not enough, you've got to have a model as well, you've got to have a theory as well.
No, that's what I meant. You just gave a better description of the same thing. Yes, I agree.
Thank you.
Questions? Nobody? No microservices? Monolith? Well, I can give you my conclusions more or less. So I think that the reality in which I live is a bit different. So because I cannot see this level of expertise in the companies that I have colleagues and so on, and they are struggling, really struggling because of the architecture, and the team is choosing the architecture and they are trying to apply all these things, but I'm missing more monoliths in the industry, and this is an opinionated thing, okay? This is in my experience. And I was missing that part, right? Microservices, no, but we've been talking during the whole conference about event-driven architectures and all these things. So there's a long tail of companies that I think that they cannot afford this kind of architecture because they are expensive, they add a lot of accidental complexity, and I think that these kinds of architecture are okay when you have a team of, 70 engineers.
Well, in case of Netflix, for example, I think that only the operations team are like 100 and something people. Only the operations team.
No.
And I know that they do 24/7, 365, and so on, right? Yeah, that's fine. But I mean, that there's a lot of people making everything working correctly.
No,
So I mean, this is something that I agree with you, that depending also on if you can afford having all these architectures or not, that there is some pay behind or some, yeah.
There is a cost. There are different types of costs, right? One is like Netflix, among other things, that's because of the scale, right? So most companies in the world are not that scale. So most companies don't have that size of a cost. But very often when I hear, and that's not the only one, but I hear about a cost, that's because this is more expensive than that. But then when you actually discuss about it, you realize it's more expensive because this is what we know how to do, and that we don't know how to do. Not necessarily that is more expensive, right? Event-driven something is not necessarily more expensive than synchronous is not necessarily more expensive than asynchronous, or vice versa. The expense really comes is that I have 20 years of experience in this, I have zero experience with that, therefore this is more expensive, right? Many others.
In some, yeah.
Very often it's that kind of, so using cloud can be easily cheaper than on-prem. However, very often ends up more expensive than on-prem simply because people don't know how to use cloud. As simple as that. They don't know, or their applications are not ready and so on and so forth. So expenses are a very, kind of saying I cannot do this or I cannot do that because it's expensive is very often not valid. And mostly because 99% of us are way behind Netflix and Google and few others. 99% of us, right? And they already gave us the practices and the tools that we can leverage. So our expense, so running a distributed system, for example, for me is much cheaper than for whomever was the first one to run it for real. Kind of, they already paved the way for us, right? Kind of, Google had to spend God knows how many millions of dollars to invent their own Borg And now we use it for free, and it's called Kubernetes. I'm not advertising Kubernetes. Take anything else you want, right? Kind of. But being behind lowers your cost drastically. And most of us are behind. Most of us do not have to go through Netflix problems.
Yeah, I mean I think that for example, moving on cloud, it's really cheaper than doing on premise. I mean that I'm not, but moving on cloud or not is just, let's say, a decision that might be easy to take, let's say, but there are other, or using an event-driven architecture or not, it might be easy, but there are other decisions that might be more risky. And the thing is that if the company can afford to fail, and this is, what you need to figure out, depending on how strong is your organization, that you can afford failing or not, because maybe you fail.
Yeah, but again, that's also tricky, because many companies, there are as many companies failing for not doing something as companies failing for doing something. Kind of, how many of Fortune 500 companies from 20 years ago are Fortune 500 companies today? And most of them did nothing, simply are not there anymore for doing nothing.
Yeah, I'm not saying not doing nothing. I'm not saying this.
No, I want to say kind of, I understand that you cannot afford to change something, to improve something because of the fear of failure, but that fear of failure can equally motivate you precisely to do something, because somebody else is doing something. Kind of what Netflix did, and I wouldn't really want to, I would be very disappointed if I would own a television company right now.
Yeah, but this happens all the time. I mean, that you can see Nokia, BlackBerry, Apple, right? And it happens, and it's normal. I mean, that, like, I remember one quote that's saying that survival is not mandatory.
There's kind of a theme that's going through this for me that's kind of interesting. So we're here in this global software architecture summit, and we a bunch of us spent yesterday talking about architecture in the abstract and all that kind of thing. And I think that's important. And one of the reasons that I came, one of the reasons that I think it's important is because this idea of kind of having a model. I think one of the problems of our industry, I think, is that we are a little bit fashion driven, and there's an awful lot of people that will jump on the I think you're right. I think that there are trailblazers.
Of course, I'm right.
From in this instance. So there are trailblazers that can kind of jump on the that will lead the way, and we can then kind of follow, and we can kind of benefit from some of that learning. But if we do that in a naive way, so I'm a consultant. I go around the world. Most of my organisations that I deal with are reasonably large organisations. Nearly every one of them is trying to adopt microservices, and nearly every one of them don't know what it is. So if you're writing microservices systems and you're still testing all of the services together, take microservices. By definition, those things are independently deployable. That's a hard, difficult attribute of microservices. That's one of these costs to that architectural pattern. I think having a level of architectural sophistication so that you can make these determinations and understand the trade-offs, the costs, I think is really important. And you can't just jump in and so if you're going to follow the pattern. Don't follow the bits that sound easy, which sometimes I think we tend to do.
Okay, so we are out of time. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here with you, and hope you enjoy it.